The chandeliers in the Grand Hargrove Opera House dripped light like something out of a dream I had never quite believed I deserved to have. Crystal and gold, warmth pooling down onto the marble lobby floor in a way that made everyone beneath it look gilded, touched, chosen. I stood in the center of all that brightness in my secondhand emerald dress and tried not to look like what I was. A woman who had counted the cost of the dry cleaning 3 times and still wasn't sure she could afford it. Serena was beside me then, or close to beside me, angled slightly away in the way she had been doing since we stepped out of the cab, close enough that I was technically her date, far enough that no one would have guessed it. "The acoustics in here are supposed to be extraordinary," I said, because I knew that. I had worked in this building, repairing cracks in 3 of their oldest instruments in the back workshop 2 years before, and I remembered the way the building breathed, the way sound moved through its bones, like it was alive. They restored the side balconies in 1987, and the resonance... Serena was already looking past me. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, perfectly finished, nothing left to chance. Her gown was wine dark and fitted, and I had watched her put it on over a video call 3 nights ago, while she talked about how much she loved opera, how she had grown up on Puccini and Verdi, how attending the premiere of La Traviata here was something she had been waiting for all year. She had asked me to come, and I had said yes, while my stomach turned small, slow somersaults of terrified, delighted hope. That was before I understood that I was not exactly a date. I was, I think, closer to a placeholder. Something to fill the seat beside her until someone better arrived. I noticed it first in the cab, the way she had looked at my dress with a smile that did not quite become warmth. "Oh," she had said, "how vintage?" And I had thought she meant it kindly. I am not always good at reading the pause that comes after a compliment when the compliment is not entirely a compliment. I noticed it again in the lobby when she steered us toward a group of people she clearly knew, people with the kind of easy laughter that belongs to those who have never worried about whether they belong somewhere. She had said my name when introducing me. "This is Nora. She works with instruments or something." And I had watched something in her expression shift when one of the women asked what kind of instruments, as if the question might open a door Serena preferred to keep closed. "Restoration," I said. "Antique restoration. I repair old instruments. Violins, cellos, sometimes woodwinds if they are pre-20th century. I have actually worked here before, in the..." "How sweet," the woman said, and looked away. Serena laughed at something someone else said, and I stood in the space of it. That small, unoccupied space that opens up when you realize you are being endured rather than enjoyed. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. The first act of La Traviata was everything I had remembered and more. Violetta's voice filled the Hargrove like water fills a vessel, and I sat with my hands in my lap and let the music do what it has always done for me, which is take whatever hurt I was carrying and give it a shape so beautiful that the hurt became almost bearable. I grew up loving opera because my mother used to listen to it on the old kitchen radio on Sunday mornings. And even when things were difficult, and they often were, she would say, "See, Nora, even sadness can sing." Serena checked her phone twice during the first act. I pretended not to notice. By the time intermission arrived, I had decided I was being too sensitive. Serena was anxious in crowds, maybe, or distracted. People were complex. I would give her the benefit of a doubt I had already had to reshape several times, press it back into something more generous than its natural form. I was good at that. Restoration, after all, is the art of returning something to what it might have been, not what it actually was. The lobby at intermission was a different kind of spectacle. Champagne flutes and silk and the particular social performance of people who had spent years learning exactly how to hold a glass and say nothing of substance with great conviction. I stood beside Serena near the south windows and watched the rain sliding down the glass outside, the street lamps turning the wet pavement amber, and thought that the city looked more honest from in here than it usually did from out there. Then I heard someone say her name. "Is that Serena Bell? God, she looks incredible." A woman's voice, low and delighted. "I heard she has been trying to get back into the Whitlock circle. Smart move, coming to the premiere." I turned slightly. The woman speaking was about 30 feet away, with her back half toward me, leaning toward a companion in that way people do when they are sharing something they consider good gossip. I caught the name Whitlock and filed it away without knowing why. Serena heard it too. I watched something shift across her face, a calculation quick as a blink. "Nora," she said, and her voice had a new quality, brisk and a little apologetic, the tone of someone who has made up their mind and is now performing regret. "I have just seen someone I absolutely have to speak to. A donor. It would be rude not to say hello." "Of course," I said. "You will be all right? The second act starts in 20 minutes. "I will be fine," I said, and believed myself almost. She moved across the lobby with the particular confidence of a woman who has always been let in. I watched her reach a group near the staircase, watched her laugh at something, place her hand on a man's arm, tall, silver-haired, the kind of wealthy that requires no effort to signal, and then watched as the group absorbed her entirely, like water taking on a new color when something is dissolved in it. She did not look back. 15 minutes passed, then 18. The chime for the second act sounded and the lobby began to drain, people filing back through the great doors with their glasses and their whispers, and I stood by the south windows watching them go and trying to understand what was happening in a way that did not require me to call it what it was. A woman with a pale blue wrap brushed past me. Another couple. A man with a program folded under his arm. The lobby grew quieter, and I did not move, and the stillness of it began to feel like something closing around me, like the moment in an old clock when the last gear catches and you realize the whole mechanism has stopped. My seat was beside Serena's. I did not know anyone else. I had no car. We had shared a cab. And the rain outside had become the kind of serious rain that makes finding a taxi at midnight a matter of luck and stubbornness. I had spent money on this dress that I did not quite have, and I had come to this building that I loved because a woman I had thought might care about me had asked me to come, and she was on the other side of a marble staircase, laughing with someone who mattered more. I was not going to cry. I was absolutely not going to cry in the lobby of the Grand Hargrove Opera House during the intermission of La Traviata. I pressed my lips together and looked at the rain. "You look," said a voice behind me, low and precise, like someone who has just been reminded of something they already knew but hoped was not true. I turned. She was standing about 6 feet away, and she was not looking at the windows. She was looking at me. She wore black silk, a fitted jacket with a high collar, a strand of large pearls that sat against the fabric like a second sentence after a long pause. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and her lipstick was the deep red of an old wound healed to a scar. She was perhaps 40, perhaps older, and she was beautiful in the way difficult things are beautiful. Not easily, not without cost. I knew who she was before she said another word. I had heard her name twice in my years working at the Hargrove, once from the opera director who had mentioned the Vale family endowment when showing me the workshop, and once from Iris, my closest friend, who had whispered it over coffee the week before when I had told her about the premiere. "Evangeline Vale owns a private box at the Hargrove," Iris had said. "Has for decades. Her late husband, Victor Vale, was one of the biggest patrons this city has ever had. She has been running the endowment since he died, about 7 years ago now. People are absolutely terrified of her. They say she once had a newspaper editor fired for running a story she did not like. They say she froze out an entire donor family for making a comment about her husband's estate. Iris had paused to stir her coffee with the same expression she used when reading plot synopses of things she was mildly appalled by. They call her the feared widow. She comes to every premiere, sits alone in that box, speaks to almost no one. Very elegantly haunted. I had thought then that she sounded lonely. I had not said so. She was standing in front of me now, and elegantly haunted was almost right, except that there was nothing vague about her. She was entirely specific. Every part of her seemed to have been decided with intention. The angle of her chin, the way her gloved hands rested at her sides, the slight pull at one corner of her mouth that might have been amusement or might have been something less comfortable. "Evangeline Vale," she said, and extended one gloved hand, not to shake, just to acknowledge. A gesture from another century that somehow made the current one feel inadequate. "Nora Ellery," I said. My voice, to its credit, held. "I know. At my expression, something shifted in hers. Not quite a smile, but the shadow where a smile might have been. "You restored the Monteverdi consort instruments in our back workshop 2 years ago. The director mentioned you when the endowment renewed the instrument maintenance contract last spring. He said you had remarkable hands. I did not know what to do with that. I looked at my hands as if consulting them. "You are here alone," she said. Not a question. "I am. My date had to speak to someone." "Your date," Evangeline said, and her eyes moved briefly in the direction Serena had gone with an expression that conveyed no particular warmth. "Left during intermission and has not returned." I watched. A pause. I tend to notice things that happen in this building. Old habit. The lobby was very quiet now. We were almost the only people left. Someone on the staff was moving slowly along the far wall, collecting abandoned glasses, and the chandeliers hummed their golden hum above us, and through the windows, the rain came down without apology. "The second act has started," I said. "Yes. I do not have a seat for the second act. I do not have—" I stopped, pressed my lips together again. I would not cry in front of Evangeline Vale. I would not cry in front of anyone. "I will find a taxi," I said. "Thank you for— I am sorry. I do not know why I said that. Thank you for saying hello." "No woman," Evangeline said quietly, "should be left alone in public by someone too small to deserve her." The words landed somewhere low in my chest and stayed there. She waited a moment. Then, "My box has 2 chairs. It has had 2 chairs since I furnished it, and there has rarely been anyone in the second one. If you would like to watch the second act, you are welcome to the seat." She said it without performance, without the warmth that would have felt patronizing or the formality that would have felt cold. She said it as a fact being offered. "You can leave at any time, no obligation. I will not be offended if you prefer to go." I looked at her. She looked back at me. "I would like to stay," I said. She nodded once, turned, and walked toward the staircase. I followed. The private boxes at the Hargrove were along the upper tier, accessed through a narrow corridor that smelled of old wood and beeswax, and the faint, specific must of a building that had been holding memories for over 100 years. Evangeline moved through it without hurrying, as though the corridor belonged to her, which in a certain legal and financial sense it did. A staff member appeared at the door to the box and gave a small, respectful nod. She did not acknowledge him with more than a glance. The door opened. She gestured. I stepped inside. The box was small and dim and velvet in a way that felt less decorative than structural, as though the velvet were the wall's natural material, what they had chosen to be rather than what they had been upholstered in. 2 low chairs faced the railing, and the railing was padded in the same deep burgundy, and beyond the railing the theater opened up like a held breath exhaled. The great chandelier, the tiers of boxes opposite, the orchestra far below, and on the stage, Violetta, already deep into the tragedy of the second act, her voice climbing the dark air. A small table between the chairs held a bottle of champagne, 2 glasses already poured. "Sit," Evangeline said. If you want the champagne, it is there. I sat. She sat. Below us, Violetta sang about love and loss and the particular anguish of understanding that you cannot have both. I kept my eyes on the stage. I did not reach for the champagne right away. I was listening to the music and trying to hold myself together with the same focused care I used when handling a 300-year-old instrument. Pressure distributed evenly, no sudden movements, nothing that could not be undone. Beside me, Evangeline was still, not in the way of someone suppressing something, but in the way of someone who had made their peace long ago with stillness. She watched the stage with an expression I could not read from the corner of my eye. Intent, closed, carrying something I did not have access to yet. After perhaps 15 minutes, she reached forward and picked up one of the champagne glasses and held it out to me without looking away from the stage. I took it. Our fingers did not touch. Her glove was silk and mine were bare and the glass was cold. But the gesture was... it was kind. It was the kind of kindness that does not announce itself, that slips in sideways while you are looking at something else. A tear made its way down my left cheek. I caught it with the back of my hand before it could become something more embarrassing. Or I thought I had. Evangeline turned her head very slightly. The second act is the worst, she said quietly, as though this were purely musical analysis. When she realizes she has to choose, it is designed to make you cry. The composer knew what he was doing. I'm not crying because of the opera, I said, and then could not believe I had said it. I know, she said, and looked back at the stage. Something in the honesty of that, the acknowledgement without the pity, the seeing without the performance of sympathy, undid me more thoroughly than kindness would have. I pressed my fingers to my mouth and breathed through my nose, and the orchestra swelled below us, and Violetta gave herself to her grief with the full operatic commitment that I, in the lobby of this building 20 minutes ago, had refused to allow myself. And somehow, watching her do it, made my own easier to carry. Evangeline did not put her hand on mine. She did not say anything comforting. She simply stayed where she was, present, real, between me and the empty lobby I had been standing in, and by the time the second act ended and the lights came up, I had managed to drink my champagne and straighten my spine and become something closer to myself. Thank you, I said. Truly. I do not know why you did that. Because I wanted to. She regarded me with that unreadable expression. And because I have sat in this box for 7 years and it seemed wasteful to keep the second chair empty. People would kill for a seat in this box, I said. Society people, I mean. Donors. Yes. A pause. Which is why none of them have been offered it. I looked at her. She picked up the champagne bottle, refilled my glass, set it down with the precision of someone who had long ago calibrated exactly how much pressure various things could take. After the final act, after Violetta's death, which broke me as it always does, which breaks everyone if they are honest about it, the lights came up fully and the sound of applause moved through the building like a tide. Evangeline rose and I rose beside her, and we filed out with the particular dignity of two people who have shared something private in public without making it visible. In the corridor, she said quietly, "Your date will be looking for you." "Probably not," I said. "She is." A glance. She came to find the staff member assigned to the boxes. I suspect someone mentioned where you were. I had not thought about that. The idea of Serena, who had left me alone in the lobby, now searching for me, now that I was seen with Evangeline Vale, now that I had become interesting, turned something cold in my stomach. We reached the main stairs. Below in the lobby, I could see people gathering their coats and programs and the warm social aftermath of a beautiful performance. And I could see Serena, moving toward the stairs with her eyes up, scanning. She found me. I watched the sequence of expressions that crossed her face. Recognition, relief, recalculation. Her gaze moved to the woman beside me and went very still. She came up the stairs quickly. Nora, I am so sorry. I got completely caught up, and then to Evangeline, with a social smile, she had not turned on me all evening. Mrs. Vale, what a wonderful evening. I am Serena Bell. We have met briefly at the Whitlock Gala last year. I do not remember you, Evangeline said pleasantly. Serena's smile did not waver, though it rearranged itself slightly. Nora and I came together tonight. It was so thoughtful of you to keep her company. Keep her company? Evangeline repeated, with the tone of someone finding an interesting error in a document. Is that what you imagined happened? The quiet of it was worse than sharpness. Serena laughed, a small, social bridging laugh. Well, I am here now. Nora, I have a car coming. Shall we? Nora is riding with me, Evangeline said. Not loudly, not cruelly. As one who states what is simply true. Serena looked at me. I looked back at her and I felt something unhook in my chest, something that had been held too carefully for too long, and I said, Good night, Serena. Her smile held. She turned it back on Evangeline one more time, received nothing in return, and walked away down the stairs with her shoulders very straight. Evangeline's car was a dark, understated thing that suited her completely. No show, all quality. A driver who did not make small talk. The rain was serious now, drumming the roof, turning the city streets into something impressionistic, all blurred light and dark motion. Evangeline had taken off her gloves and folded them on her knee, and she watched the city the way she had watched the opera, with an expression I was beginning to think might simply be what her attention looked like when she allowed it to rest on something real. She had draped her coat around my shoulders outside without asking, when the rain hit and I had flinched against it. It smelled of cedar and something darker underneath, old and expensive, and it was warm in a way that made me uncomfortably aware that I had been cold in the lobby for longer than I had admitted to myself. Where do you live? She asked. I told her the street and she told the driver. Then she turned back to the window. I should give you back your coat, I said. When we arrive. We were quiet for a block, then 2. Was your marriage unhappy? I asked, and immediately wanted to take it back. I'm sorry. I do not know why I asked that. It was not unhappy, she said. It was incomplete. Victor died 6 years ago now. Cancer. A pause. We were not in love. We had been briefly early on, in the way that people are in love when they are young and love and convenience are not yet distinguishable from one another. But we had not been for a long time before he died. She said it without drama. I told him so once, toward the end. He was surprised. Then he said he had known it too. I think it was the most honest conversation we ever had. I am sorry, I said, and meant it differently than I had expected to when I said it. Do not be. I had a good life with him in many ways. I had this city. I had the opera. She turned her head and looked at me with the directness that I was beginning to understand was simply how she looked at things, without softening the angle. And I have not had the other kind yet. The city moved past us. I did not ask what the other kind was. She did not need me to. Outside my building, she got out of the car with me, which I had not expected, and stood on the wet pavement while I slid the coat off my shoulders and held it out to her. She took it. We stood in the rain, which was less polite about us than it had been about the car. Thank you, I said, for all of it. Will you let me send you something? She asked. Professionally, there is a violin. It came into my possession a few months ago. It belonged to a musician friend of Victor's, and she left it to me in her will. But it needs work, I am not equipped to arrange, and the building workshop is not taking private commissions currently. She reached into her jacket and produced a card, small and heavy stock and printed with only her name and a number. Only if you are interested. There is no obligation. I took the card. I am interested, I said. She nodded. Got back into the car. The car pulled away through the rain. I stood on the wet pavement in my second-hand emerald dress, holding Evangeline Vale's card, and listening to the sound of the city settling back into itself after a storm. And I was still sad about Serena, because these things do not stop being sad, just because something more interesting has happened. But the sadness had a shape now that fit in my hands instead of swallowing them. I went inside. I did not sleep well. Iris called me at 9 the next morning, and I told her everything. "Evangeline Vale put you in her private box," Iris said. "Yes." "Evangeline Vale gave you her coat." "Yes." "Evangeline Vale shut down Serena Bell in approximately 2 sentences and then offered you her car." "Yes, Iris." A pause. "Nora, she is sending you a violin. She might be sending me a violin, professionally." "Nora." Another pause, longer. "I need you to understand the weight of what I am about to say." Iris had a gift for dramatic calibration. "Evangeline Vale has had 2 chairs in that box for 7 years, and you are the first person to sit in the second one. I know this because it was literally mentioned in a society column 2 years ago when someone made a joke about it, and she had the paper issue a correction saying the box seated 2 by design, and the second chair was her business. She did not have someone issue a correction over a chair. She absolutely did. It was very polite and also very devastating." Iris paused. "Go restore her violin, Nora." The violin arrived 4 days later, delivered by a man in a dark car who handed me a long, padded case and a handwritten note on the same heavy cardstock as the one she had given me in the rain. The handwriting was precise and slightly slanted, as though the writer had been taught perfect penmanship and then quietly decided to be themselves anyway. The instrument is a guadagnini, circa 1765. It has been unplayed for 11 years. I am told it has a very particular sound, low and warm, more cello-like than most violins of its period. I do not know how much work it requires. I trust your assessment entirely. Avis. I opened the case and looked at the violin for a long time before I touched it. It was beautiful in the way all very old instruments are beautiful, marked by time, by the particular cruelty of being left silent. The varnish darkened unevenly and the neck joint loose and the fine tuners seized. But underneath all of that, the structure true, the wood still singing its silent song. I pressed my ear gently against the belly of it, and I could feel somehow the resonance still stored there, waiting. I called the number on the card. She answered on the second ring. "Vale." "It is Nora Ellery. I have opened the case." "And?" "It is exceptional. The damage is real, but repairable. The peg box needs work. The varnish needs cleaning and some careful consolidation. The neck joint needs resetting. 4 to 6 weeks if I am careful. Possibly less if the wood responds well." I paused. "Did you know what it was when you sent it?" "I had it appraised when it came to me. I know what it is worth." "Then you know it is worth more careful hands than—" "I know whose hands I wanted on it," she said. Not warmly, precisely, as though this were entirely logical. "Do you have what you need? Equipment? Materials?" "I do. I will need to come to the Opera House once to look at the instrument in its original setting, if that is possible, to understand the acoustic environment it was built for. I will arrange it," she said. "After hours. When would suit you?" We met on a Thursday evening when the building was quiet, when the rehearsal schedule was done and the house staff was down to a skeleton crew and the big chandelier was at half power, giving everything an underwater quality, soft and strange. She met me at the stage door herself, which surprised me. She wore dark trousers and a high-collared shirt and no jewelry, which was somehow more striking than all the silk and pearls. She took me through corridors I half remembered from my restoration work 2 years before and into the pit area, where the acoustics pooled and concentrated. I brought the violin out of its case and held it under the lights there and played 3 open strings, or tried to. The tuning was shot, and the sound it made was rough and throaty. But even so, in that space, I could hear what it wanted to be. what it was underneath the years of silence. Evangeline stood back and listened to those 3 untuned open strings as though they were a performance. "You can hear it," I said. "Can you not?" "What it will be." "Yes." She looked at the violin. "That is exactly what Leonora used to say. She said every instrument has a sound it is trying to become." "Leonora was the musician friend?" "She was. She played with the city orchestra for 20 years. She and Victor were close. She came to dinner every Sunday until she was too ill to come." A pause. "I have not heard this violin since her last concert, 11 years ago. I was not sure I wanted to hear it again. I have decided I was wrong about that. That sentence, I was not sure I wanted to. I have decided I was wrong. Stayed with me the whole train ride home. It felt like information about something other than the violin. Over the weeks that followed, we developed a rhythm. I worked on the Guadagnini in my workshop during the week and sent her short written updates because I had learned she preferred those to calls. She responded consistently and briefly, occasionally asking questions that revealed she understood more about instrument acoustics and construction than she had implied. Once I sent a photograph of the neck joint repair in progress, and she replied, "The wood grain is extraordinary. I had not noticed before. How do you see things like that?" I wrote back, "You look at them closely. That is all." She did not respond to that for 2 days. When she did, she wrote, "Perhaps that is what I have been doing wrong." Twice during those weeks, she invited me to the Opera House for evening events, a donor rehearsal for a new production, a chamber concert in one of the smaller halls. I went because the Guadagnini gave me a professional excuse to be there, which I recognized as a transparent excuse but used anyway. She was different in those public settings, more formal, harder-edged, deployed. People turned careful when she appeared. She navigated the room with the ease of someone who had stopped expecting warmth from it. I watched her deflect a conversation with a man named Adrian Whitlock, the director of major donor relations, who wanted her to attach her name to a new fundraising initiative. She said no with such refined finality that he walked away, looking as though he had decided this had been his idea all along. Afterward, I asked her how she did that. Did what? Made him feel like he chose to leave. She considered the question seriously, which I had noticed she did with things that interested her. "You let them believe they have been generous," she said. "Everyone wants to feel generous. Agree with something small and be immovable on the thing that matters." She tilted her head. "You would be good at it, actually. You are very quiet in rooms full of noise. People mistake quiet for compliance. That sounds like it might be a compliment." "It is," she said. "Take it as one. I heard about Celia Voss before I met her. Iris had mentioned her once. The kind of person who collects gossip like some people collect art, very acquisitively, very publicly. And I had seen her name in the society column that Iris sometimes read aloud for amusement. She was charming in the practiced way of someone who understands that charm is a social currency, not a natural gift. I met her at the chamber concert when she materialized beside me with a glass of wine and the particular smile of someone who has already decided they find you interesting, but has not decided in what way. "You are Nora Ellery," she said, the restoration artist. "Yes." "You are doing work for Evangeline Vale?" "I am." "How fascinating." Her eyes moved briefly to Evangeline across the room. "She does not usually engage with people, not personally, not professionally unless it is opera business." She took a sip of wine. "You must be very skilled." I had restored enough objects to recognize the structure of that sentence. The must be, carrying something just slightly too pointed, the flattery as a frame around the question it was really asking. "I am," I said pleasantly, and turned back to the performance. Something I had not expected. That working on the Guadagnini would feel like getting to know her. Instruments carry their history in their wood and their wear, in the particular places they have been touched and the places they have not, in the repairs other hands have made before yours. As I cleaned the varnish and reset the neck and eased the seized pegs loose, I found traces of Leonora, rosin built up in the specific way of a player who pressed firmly on the attack, a small mark inside the lower bout that looked like a repair from a fall, the fingerboard worn in the positions of a player who favored the middle register, a life in wood and wire. I told Evangeline some of this when she came to my workshop for the first time. She came on a Saturday afternoon, which I had not expected. She had sent a message the evening before. "Would you have time tomorrow if I came to see the work?" And I had said yes, and then spent the next hour looking at my workshop with new eyes, which is to say with the eyes of someone imagining it seen by another. My workshop is a ground floor space in the building where I live, and it is the most honest room I inhabit. Cluttered in the way of useful spaces rather than neglected ones, with bench lighting and tool racks and a smell of wood shavings and linseed oil and the particular clean chemical smell of the solvents I use for varnish work. I put the kettle on and moved some papers, and that was as much as I managed. She arrived exactly when she said she would, in dark wool and flat shoes, which she had never worn the other times I had seen her. And she stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the way she looked at everything, with the attention she brought to things she intended to understand. "This is where you work," she said. "It is." She came in and walked slowly along the bench, looking at the instruments in various stages of repair. A Baroque oboe with a cracked joint, an 18th century cittern missing 2 strings, a small viola in for a bridge reset. She stopped at the Guadagnini. I had propped it in its rest for the varnish consolidation to finish drying. "May I?" she asked. "Yes." She picked it up with more confidence than I had expected. Not the tentative way of someone unfamiliar with instruments, but with the full-handed support of someone who knew exactly where the weight should sit. She held it under the bench light and turned it slowly. "You found the mark inside," I said, "a repair from before the previous owner. Probably 1940s by the look of the material they used." "Leonora's teacher," Evangeline said, without looking up. "She told me once that her teacher dropped it down a flight of stairs. She cried for a week." She turned the violin once more and set it carefully back in its rest. "How much longer?" "Another week for the varnish. Then I will string it. Then I will want to play it in for a few days before I feel right about returning it." "Take the time it needs." She straightened and turned to face me fully, and I was abruptly very aware of how small my workshop was, how close the bench was, how the afternoon light came through the single high window and caught the angles of her face differently than the chandeliers of the opera house had. "I have been reading about Guadagnini," she said. "He was not the most celebrated maker of his generation in his own time. He made beautiful things and was constantly underestimated." I looked at her. She looked back at me. The parallel she was drawing was not, I thought, entirely about the violin. "Some things take a while to find their right audience," I said. "Yes," she said. "Tea?" We drank tea in the workshop, and she asked me questions about my work that were intelligent and specific, and I found myself talking about restoration philosophy in a way I rarely did outside of Iris's patient company, about the difference between returning something to its original state and returning it to its best possible state, about when the right choice was to leave a repair visible as history rather than concealing it as damage. "The invisible repair," I said, "is technically the harder one, but sometimes the visible one is more honest, more complete. You do not pretend the fall never happened. You acknowledge it and show that the instrument survived." Evangeline was quiet for a moment, turning her cup. "I like that," she said. "I find invisible repairs unconvincing generally in things and in people. People usually prefer them. People usually prefer not to be uncomfortable." She looked up at me with that steady gaze. "That does not mean they are right." I thought about that for a long time after she left. 3 weeks later, the Guadagnini was ready. I strung it on a Tuesday and played it in for 4 days, 2 or 3 hours each morning, running it through scales and simple exercises to begin opening the sound. It responded better than I had hoped. The voice that came out of it was exactly as she had described in the note. Low, warm, larger than its body should have suggested, with an undertone on the G string that made my eyes sting slightly. Not from sadness exactly, but from the quality of the thing itself, the fact of it. This beautiful old voice coming back to itself after 11 years of silence. On Friday, I wrote, "She is ready. When would you like her back?" The response came within minutes. "Could you bring her to the house tonight? For dinner, if you are willing. I would like to hear her in a proper room." The Vale house was in the old part of the city, a street of tall stone buildings that had been elegant for so long they had stopped needing to try. The house itself was set back from the street behind a low iron gate and a garden that even in autumn had a disciplined beauty. Things growing in the exact places they were meant to grow, nothing wandering. She opened the door herself. She was wearing black as usual, but differently from the public Evangeline. A soft high-necked sweater, dark trousers, hair down, hair down. It changed her face, made it less defended. I noticed a thread of gray at her temple and the slight tiredness around her eyes that she concealed completely in public, and I thought about what it must cost, always, to be entirely assembled. She led me through the house, which was large and quiet, and furnished with the particular restraint of someone who had spent years learning not to fill space with things simply because she could. There were books everywhere, which pleased me more than the artwork or the good furniture. In the room she led me to, high-ceilinged, soft-lit, with a grand piano at one end that clearly had not been played in a while, there was a chair positioned by the window and a music stand, and 2 glasses of wine already on a low table. "Will you play something?" she asked. "I am not a violinist," I said. "I restore them. I play well enough to assess an instrument, but—" "Will you play something?" she said again, quietly. Not a demand, a request she believed in. I took the Guadagnini out of the case, I tuned it carefully. I stood by the window in the lamplight and I played the opening bars of the chaconne, Bass, D minor, because it was what I knew by heart, and because it felt right for the instrument, for the room, for the particular quality of the moment. I did not play it well, in the technical sense. I played it honestly, which is a different thing. The violin responded to every bow stroke with a generosity that made me feel, briefly, like a better player than I was. When I stopped, the silence in the room had a different quality than the silence before. Evangeline was sitting very still in the chair by the window and her face was open. Unguarded in a way I had not seen before, all the careful architecture of her public expression temporarily unavailable, and underneath it something very simple and very old. Grief, I thought, but the kind that has been processed through so many other things that it has become something else. Tenderness, perhaps. Longing of the particular kind that belongs to people who stopped expecting to receive. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. I set the violin down carefully and sat across from her, and we looked at each other in the lamplight, and the city outside was doing whatever cities do in the evening, indifferent and ongoing. "She sounds like herself," Evangeline said. "She does. More than she did before, I think. Leonora always said there was something the instrument had not unlocked yet." She paused. "Perhaps it needed time." "Or the right hands," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Or both." We had dinner. She had made part of it herself, which surprised me. She was precise about the distinction between what she had made and what she had arranged, which told me something about how she understood honesty to function. We sat across from each other at a table that could have seated 12 and ate and talked, and the talking came easily in a way that I had stopped expecting from people. That ease, the kind where you say a thought aloud before you have finished deciding whether you mean it, because you trust that it will be received. She told me about growing up in this city, in this house, actually. Her parents had owned it, and she had grown up in rooms I was sitting in, which she seemed to find faintly amusing. She told me about learning opera at 6, sitting in the private box beside her father, who had loved it without understanding it. She told me about marrying Victor at 26 because he was kind and because her family expected it, and because she had not yet learned to insist on things for herself. You would have been better at it than I was, I said. Insisting. She shook her head. No, it took a very long time to learn. Victor's death it clarified things. Not pleasantly, but clearly. She poured more wine. People assumed I would be devastated. I was sad. Those are not the same thing. What are the rumors? I asked. She looked at me. About you, I said. About what happened after he died. Iris told me. There are stories that you destroyed people, froze out families, orchestrated things. She was quiet for a moment. Some of the stories are true, she said, not the dramatic ones. But there were people who used Victor's death as an opportunity to take things that were not theirs. From the estate, from the endowment, from the opera program he had built. I stopped them. A pause. I stopped them without apology or explanation, which made me seem ruthless rather than correct. I found I could live with the perception more easily than with what they were doing. She looked at her glass. People fear what they do not understand, and they do not understand someone who does not negotiate when they have been wronged. You let people be afraid of you. It was simpler. She looked up. Or it was. Was, I said. She held my gaze. Yes. The dinner ended late. She showed me out herself, and we stood on the step for a moment in the cool air, and I thought about how many doorsteps I had stood on with her now, in rain or in the clear cold, the city always doing something indifferent in the background, and how each time leaving had been harder than the time before. Same time next week? She said. And then, with something that was almost uncertainty, a quality I had not heard from her before, and recognized immediately as being offered deliberately. I have a new performance to attend. The Rossini, if you wanted to come. I would like that, I said. We went to the Rossini. We went to 3 performances after that, sitting in the private box together, and by the 3rd time there was nothing strange about it. Nothing that required explanation. We arrived together and sat close enough that sometimes her arm was against mine on the shared armrest. And occasionally she would say something low and exact about the music or the performance, and I would turn toward her in the dark to hear it better, and it was the most natural thing, which is why I did not see the crisis coming until I was standing in the middle of it. The fundraising gala was Adrian Whitlock's project, a major charity event in the Opera House, the grand foyer cleared and laid with tables, the kind of evening where the ticket price represented a month of my income without anyone remarking on it. I attended as Evangeline's guest, which had become, quietly, the way I attended things. Celia Voss was there, which I had expected. What I had not expected was Serena. She was wearing the wine-dark gown again, and she was with the silver-haired man I had seen her join at the intermission weeks before. Adrian Whitlock, I now understood, who had apparently decided that Serena's social ambitions aligned usefully with his own. She saw me before I saw her, and the expression on her face when she did was the most honest one I had seen from her. Surprise, recalculation, and then something brittle that was trying to look like indifference. For most of the evening, I stayed close to Evangeline, who moved through the gala with her usual composed authority, speaking to those she chose to speak to and declining others without visible effort. But near the end of the evening, during the cocktail hour before the performance that would close the event, I found myself briefly across the room from her, talking to one of the instrument workshop staff I knew when Celia appeared. She arrived with Serena behind her, which was either coincidence or choreography. Given what followed, I think it was choreography. "Nora," Celia said warmly, "you look wonderful. Everyone has been talking about you." "Have they?" I said. "Of course. Quite the story. Abandoned at the opera and rescued by the feared widow." She said it the way some people say things they know are cruel, brightly, with a smile, so that objecting requires more effort than the comment itself. People are saying you have become her project. You know how she is about her projects. I do not know how she is about her projects, I said. Why do you not tell me? Celia laughed. Beside her, Serena was doing the social smile thing, which was somehow worse than whatever Celia was saying, because it was so familiar. She collects damaged things, Serena said, lightly, as though it were affectionate. You said so yourself. You restore broken instruments. Maybe that is what appeals to her. Another restoration project. There was a moment, a bright, icy moment, where I felt the old humiliation trying to resurface, the lobby feeling, the being left feeling, the feeling of being too small for the space I was standing in. And then it did not. It just did not. Because I had spent weeks in the company of a woman who had never treated me as a project or a curiosity or a piece of interesting scenery, who had sat with me in the dark and handed me champagne and let me play an 11-year silent violin in her lamplit room and cooked dinner for me at a table that could have seated 12 and talked to me like someone whose thoughts she found genuinely worth the time, who had chosen consistently and quietly to be exactly where I was. Evangeline does not collect broken things, I said. My voice was even. She restores what other people overlooked. Those are different activities. Serena's expression went very still. And she has been overlooked herself, I said. For years, by people who found her reputation more comfortable than her company, which is their loss. I looked at Celia, then back at Serena. I am not a project. I am not a curiosity. I am someone she chose to know, which is more than either of you managed. I turned away from them. Evangeline was standing 10 feet behind me. She had been close enough to hear. I could tell by the quality of her stillness, which was not the usual stillness of her composure, but something softer and harder at the same time. Her eyes on me had an expression I had not seen before. Not gratitude exactly. Something older than gratitude and more vulnerable. I did not know you were behind me, I said. I know, she said. I should have announced myself. I came to find you. A pause. I heard most of that. Then you know I meant it. She looked at me for a long moment in which the gala continued its cheerful business around us, glasses clinking, someone laughing at the far end of the room, the orchestra warming up beyond the doors. Come away from here, she said quietly. Please. We went through a side door. She knew every unlocked door in this building. And into a corridor, and the sounds of the gala receded to a low murmur. The corridor was lined with photographs of past productions, faces going back 60 years, performers and benefactors, and the particular formality of old portraits. We stood among them in the quiet. I want to tell you something, she said. All right? I have been trying to be careful with you, she said. Deliberately careful. Because you came into this at a strange angle, through a humiliation that was not your fault, and I did not want to... She stopped, started again. You are not someone I find interesting because you are damaged. You are not a project. I want to be very clear about that. I know, I said. I do not think you do, entirely. She looked at the photographs as though steadying herself on something fixed. I find you interesting because you see things clearly, because you say what you actually mean, because you handled an 11-year-old violin as though its feelings mattered, because you sat in my box on a night when you were devastated and did not pretend you were not. But you did not collapse either. She turned to look at me, and her voice, which was always so precise, had something in it that was not precisely controlled. I have not wanted to see someone clearly in a very long time. I have been afraid to. And then you were standing in my lobby looking at the rain, and, Evangeline, I said. She stopped. I crossed the distance between us. It was not very far. And I put my hand on her jaw, carefully, the way I touch things I want to keep, and tilted her face toward mine and kissed her. She was still for exactly one heartbeat, and then she was not still at all. She kissed me back with the same quality she brought to everything that mattered to her, fully without reservation, precise and complete. Her hands came up to hold me, both hands, one at my waist and one at the side of my neck, and we stood in the corridor among 60 years of opera portraits and the distant sound of a gala, and the kiss was long and slow and entirely itself. When we stopped, we stayed close, foreheads nearly touching, and the corridor was very quiet, and the gala was very far away. "I have wanted to do that," she said, "for some time." "Me too," I said. "That seems like important information," she said, with that not quite smile, and I laughed, actually laughed, in the way that only comes when something you have been holding releases all at once. And she smiled then, properly, fully, and it changed everything about her face. It made her beautiful in a completely different way. Not the controlled elegance I had first seen, but something warmer and more vulnerable and unfinished in the best possible sense. We went back to the gala eventually. She walked beside me with her hand at the small of my back, which was a quiet and public thing, and which I knew, in this particular city and this particular room, meant something. I saw Celia Voss notice. I saw Serena notice, with something on her face that had long since stopped being any of my business. I saw Adrian Whitlock notice with the expression of a man recalibrating a set of assumptions. Evangeline moved through the room exactly as she always had, except that I was beside her and her hand was at my back, and she introduced me to the 2 or 3 people she chose to speak to, as Nora Ellery, the restoration artist I have told you about. With a proprietary warmth so understated, it would have been invisible to anyone not already paying attention. I was paying attention. The weeks after the gala were different in the way that only happens when something that has been building quietly is finally allowed to be what it is. I still worked. The Guadagnini had gone back to Evangeline's house, and I had taken on a new commission, a Baroque cello that would occupy my hands for months. Iris received the full account of the gala evening with the expression of someone receiving news they had predicted and were delighted to have confirmed. "I knew about the private box," she said. I said it right away. I said that box was something. "You said she was elegantly haunted." "She is, though. Elegantly haunted and apparently very much in love with you." Iris stirred her coffee. "How does she kiss?" "Iris, I am asking for documentation purposes." "Deliberately," I said, and then, because it was the only word that fit, "completely." Iris sighed happily. "Good." We settled into something, not a routine, which is too small a word, but a rhythm that had its own logic. I worked in my workshop in the mornings. Sometimes in the afternoons, I would go to the Vale house, or she would come to the workshop, and we would work side by side, her with papers or correspondence, me with whatever instrument was on the bench. And it was one of the quietest and most satisfying things I had experienced, that particular shared silence. In the evenings often we went to the opera. She showed me gradually the parts of herself that she kept carefully off stage in public. The precision she brought to the endowment's finances, the loyalty she felt for the opera staff who had worked there for decades, the way she talked to the elderly costume mistress, a woman named Elaine, with a gentleness completely different from any version of herself she deployed socially. The books she read, which were wide-ranging and sometimes surprising, technical texts on music theory beside novels, beside philosophy, beside a well-worn bird guide that made me ask. "Leonora's?" she said. "She was always watching birds from that window. I have not been able to give it away." "You do not have to," I said. She looked at the guide. "No," she said. "I know." She came to my workshop on a Tuesday morning in early winter and found me deep in the Baroque cello, both of us covered in a light layer of wood dust from the joint repair I had been doing since 7. She did not knock. I had given her the keys some weeks before, casually, and she had received it with equal casualness, and we had both pretended this was not significant. She set down 2 cups of coffee on the only clear corner of the bench and stood watching me work with the expression she wore when she was genuinely interested in something. "You talked to it," she said. "The cello?" "You were talking to it when I came in? Under your breath." I considered denying this and decided not to. "I tell them what is happening before I do it," I said. "It sounds absurd." "It sounds considerate," she said. I looked at her over my shoulder. She was sitting on the tall stool with her coffee, and there was something so at home about her in this room that it made my chest ache. In the good way, the way that is almost indistinguishable from sorrow, except that it points toward rather than away. "Evangeline," I said. I'm not going to stop being exactly what I am. The workshop, the instruments, the modest apartment, the second-hand dresses. I want you to know that I know that about myself. I am not going to change to fit the spaces you move in." She turned her cup. "I know that. I want to be sure you—" "Nora." She looked at me with the full force of her attention. "When have I asked you to change anything?" I thought about it. Actually thought about it. "Never," I said. "No." She picked up her coffee. "I have been changed by extremely polished spaces for most of my life. It is not an experience I am looking to repeat. I am here." She looked around the workshop, the tool racks and the bench lighting and the half-restored cello and the morning winter light through the high window. "I am here because this is where you are. This is the room that interests me." I put down the fine scraper I was holding. I crossed the workshop. I kissed her among the wood dust and the smell of linseed oil, and she kissed me back with the complete intentionality she brought to everything that mattered, and the coffee got cold. The year turned. There were things that were not simple. The gossip never entirely stopped, because Celia Voss was a dedicated practitioner, and the story of Evangeline Vale's companion, a restoration artist from a modest address, not a donor or a socialite, was exactly the kind of story that kept itself alive. I learned to hear it with the tolerant detachment of someone who has decided that the opinion of the uninterested is not relevant data. Evangeline, who had always known this, seemed to find my arrival at the same conclusion mildly gratifying. There were evenings at the Vale house and evenings in my apartment. And the evenings in my apartment were, I thought, Evangeline's favorite, though she would never have said so. The smallness of the space, the single good lamp, the fact that she could sit on my second-hand sofa and read while I worked at the kitchen table, and there was nowhere to perform anything. There was a night in early spring when she stayed late, and then later, and the city outside was doing something soft with rain again, and she fell asleep on the sofa with Leonora's bird guide in her hands. I sat in the armchair for a while, just watching her sleep, thinking about the night in the lobby when she had been standing in that corridor of gilded light and said no woman should be left alone in public by someone too small to deserve her, and how much had happened since then, how much had been repaired. I had covered her with the blanket from the back of the sofa before I went to bed. In the morning, she was in the kitchen making coffee, looking out the window at the street below with that expression she got when she was not monitoring herself. "There is a sparrow on the fire escape," she said. "He lives there," I said. "I call him Puccini." She turned. "Of course you do." She poured me coffee, and we stood together at the kitchen window watching Puccini investigate the drain, and the city woke up below us. And she put her arm around me from behind with the particular ease of someone who has stopped being careful with something because they know it will hold. The spring premiere at the Hargrove was Madama Butterfly. Evangeline had been in the planning committee since the previous year and had opinions about the production design that she had expressed directly and at length to the director, who was learning to receive her opinions with gratitude rather than defensiveness. I had been invited to the opening night not as a restoration artist, not as a guest, but simply as the person who would be sitting in the second chair in the private box, which was apparently no longer a source of comment because Evangeline had made it precisely known that it was not. We arrived together. She was in black, as always. Black silk this time, the severe high-collared kind, with the pearls, with dark lipstick, and she was every bit the feared widow she had ever been, or as much of it as she chose to deploy, which was enough. People gave her space. They turned slightly. They watched. And they watched me beside her, and I wore a dress I had bought new. Deep green, not quite emerald, entirely my own choice. And I stood straight. Celia Voss was there. She gave me a small, complicated look that I returned with equanimity. We went upstairs before the performance, through the corridors that smelled of old wood and beeswax, and she unlocked the private box with the same key she had always used, and held the door, and I walked through it. The theater was filling below us, the murmur of it rising to where we were, and the chandelier was doing its usual stunning thing, and the orchestra was beginning the careful process of becoming one sound instead of many. And the chairs were exactly as they had been on the night Serena Bell had left me in the lobby, and everything had changed. I sat in the second chair. Evangeline sat beside me. She reached into her jacket and produced something small and held it out. A key, old-fashioned on a silk ribbon, the kind of key that belonged to a different era. "For the box," she said. "Your own. So you do not have to come in on mine." I looked at it, looked at her. "Evangeline." "I know," she said. "Take it anyway." I took it. She turned back to the stage. The lights began to dim. Below us, the audience settled into quiet, and the orchestra found itself, and the curtain moved. I felt her hand on mine on the armrest. Not dramatic, not announced, just placed there with the same precise intention she brought to everything important. Warm through her silk glove. Entirely present. On the stage, the music rose. In the private box, in the dimming light, in the city that had been doing its indifferent and ongoing thing outside all this time. I closed my hand around hers and held on, and the opera breathed through the old building like something alive, and the second chair was occupied, and I was not going anywhere. Neither was she.